Recently, we put out a video on this channel about how I'm getting back into producing. And one of the main hang-ups I had when I first tried producing from age 12 to age 22 is that I could never get the sounds that I wanted. Everything was like a happy accident. Nothing was intentional. And that's because I never really learned how synthesis actually works. Now, if you know everything about synthesis, you can pretty much go into any VST and make any sound that you want. But if you know nothing about synthesis, you're relying on presets, you're relying on happy accidents, and nothing's really intentional. So in this video, Cupp primarily is going to show you some awesome resources for learning about synthesis so that you can do it much faster, which I'm going to be using as well. Let's get into it. What you doing, Cupp?
Not much, player. Learning about synths.
How did you first learn about synths?
I bought a synth, a Roland Juno G. It was a analog styled digital workstation synthesizer. So it had a couple oscillators on it, had all the other standard components, filters, amplifiers, LFOs, envelopes.
And a lot of people come to you to kind of amp up their production knowledge, right? Like I've heard you talk about your friends who are now like sick with it.
Yeah.
But in the past, where have you pointed them to learn about synthesis?
Usually what I'll do is I'll try to point them towards like a really basic synth. One that has, the standard components that a synth has.
So a synthesizer starts with a signal
generator.
Signal generator, and that signal can be a waveform of different variants. So you have your sine wave, which is a smooth sound, and you have your square wave, which sounds very grating, your saw wave, which is equally grating, and then other weird types of waves beyond that.
Yeah.
And then an amplifier, which takes that signal, makes
turns it into an audible sound that could be played through a speaker.
And then you have filters.
You can have a filter in between the signal generator and the amplifier. So an envelope is a control parameter.
Oh, here's the attack, right?
Yeah.
And then here's the sustain.
And decay.
And
sustain
decay.
And decay are together.
Sustain and decay are together, and then the release. Yeah.
Afterwards.
So you've seen one of those before, and that can be put anywhere in the chain after the signal generator.
It can be assigned.
So that envelope can be assigned to any characteristic of the chain that's in that synth chain.
Right.
Right.
I mean, in most digital synthesizers or even a lot of modular setups, you can assign it to just about any signal you want.
So, and then you have filters and you have LFOs, right? Which are a type of...
Well, an LFO is a modulator.
It's a modulator.
So it's a low frequency oscillator. So it's usually in a sub-audible frequency, which means it's very slow compared to like audible frequencies.
But ultimately what it's doing is it's modifying the signal that comes through it.
Yeah, well, whatever you assign it to.
Right.
You can assign it to the pitch of the tone or the frequency of the filter.
So when you look at it like you've got your signal generator, let's say it's a sine wave, and it's at a certain amplitude and pitch, and then you can assign an envelope to that signal if you want to, which will control how quickly it gets to that amplitude, and then how it drops off.
Yeah.
And then what happens when you...
modulator. So like an envelope or an LFO, they're both modulators, but
see, now I'm even learning in this lesson.
Yeah.
So you've got your different types of modulators, and you can assign modulators to other modulators.
Yeah,
but
it
ultimately
gets really complex really easily.
But it's easiest to think about it as like you've got your signal generator that's generating a tone, and the characteristics of that tone and what happens thereafter is determined entirely by modulators and filters and stuff like that, and even other.
Essentially, yeah, just the modulators and filters. It gets really complex. You can add more amps, more filters, more modulators.
Yeah. So we're going to link to a bunch of video series in the description that explain what we're talking about here very quickly. Let's say someone's got all this stuff. They understand it to a degree and they want to start playing around with it. Where do you send them?
One thing that I like to show people to use to learn a lot more about how synthesizers work and how they interplay is a program called VCV Rack. Essentially just a virtual modular synthesizer. So a modular synthesizer is usually a big bank of hardware modules that people, especially hobbyists, will buy and customize, and they interconnect with all these patch cables, and it gets really complex and kind of, it can be sort of scary to look at.
But when you talked about assigning like an LFO to a certain parameter of like a signal generator, it's with a patch cable. You're actually patching it into that parameter.
Yeah, so you get to have like a physical representation of what that looks like.
Right.
So you can pick a basic oscillator module, and then you can run that through a basic filter module,
Right.
and then run that to a basic amplifier and start from there. And then you'll get to add an LFO or an envelope, and you get to see how all these things interconnect in an analog sense, in an actual sense.
This is like a digital version of that, like
yeah, and these are real world modules that you can purchase. And if you learn how to use this, you can buy the actual modules and get into using hardware synths, which is another new world to get into. Because
shout out to Andrew Huang. Give me the 5.
Right, yeah.
Hey, it's Andrew Huang.
One of the other cool things that you can do is just try to open up, whatever the most basic synth that you have in your DAW is. With Ableton, it's analog. With Fruity Loops, or FL Studio. God, that dates my experience when it comes to FL Studio. I don't remember what it is, but I know with Logic.
But these DAWs have like a.
There's usually like a standard one that you can open up, and it's not just start with an oscillator. Start with 2 oscillators, then filter, and then LFO, and just start assigning
you'll
things.
literally see a section of that's called oscillator, and it'll have these characteristics.
Or OSC.
And then you'll see typically an envelope generator as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one really cool thing that I just found while installing Ableton on this computer is that Ableton has created this online kind of lesson for synthesizers, and it starts from the very beginning. It starts from synth basics, shows you envelopes, and it's an interactive tool that you can actually like draw with, which is really fucking cool.
Yeah.
It shows you from a basic standpoint what everything in a synth kind of looks like with how it sounds, and this is an ADSR envelope, and for LFOs, filters, and it even shows you recipes for how common synth sounds are created. Different oscillators, different wave types, and it's really cool. I think it's just called learningsynths.ableton.com.
And you don't have to have Ableton to use this?
No. You can just go straight to the website.
That's so awesome. And so, by going through this, you'll probably learn at a deep level what you might learn from those YouTube videos.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's probably even better because it gives you more of like an interplay, with what it looks like, visually.
It kind of saves you the time of going through the videos and then using a digital synth to play around.
And it's a lot less complex than using modulars type stuff. And I mean, for somebody who knows synths, start playing with modulars, because then it gets a lot more complex with all the different patch points and different modules that you'll usually use. For a beginner, this is the perfect tool, learning synths. Pretty cool.
So since this man has told me about all this stuff, I've been getting a lot more into creating my own synths and stuff. Usually he's next to me so that I don't look like an idiot. He can tell me what I'm doing wrong. But it's definitely cool to be able to exert a control over it, instead of having to just guess around, which I think a lot, if you got into production the way I got into production, which maybe you're not as stupid as me, but it was a crapshoot whether I would get anything that sounded like what I wanted it to sound like. And I was usually at the whims of whatever preset. Use this Ableton thing to get your understanding down, and then start playing around with the modular. And then anytime you open up a VST that you like, you'll be able to tweak sounds on the fly.
Familiar with a general synth, of any type.
It's very rare for these guys to be willing to certainly say anything, because everything's so context dependent, right? I got them to say, basically, what's magic about presets is oftentimes something you could replicate if you knew everything about synthesis and how they built the preset. I'm committing heresy now.
It's getting really hard. Because
basically, the more you know about synthesis, the more you can recreate the sounds you want to create.
Yeah.
We'll boil it down to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
This dude taught me the other day, I was trying to pick out a bass preset for a song I was working on, and he was like, oh, just use a sine wave.
And I was the most basic.
And I was like, should I put an envelope on it or this or that? He was like, no, you're good.
Just use the bass.
Definitely get your synth game up, because it certainly helped Kenny not be an embarrassment in life. Kenny, how did you learn about synthesis?
I got a VST called Massive that I heard Skrillex used when I was 18. And I was like, well, if he uses it, I gotta use it. I got obsessed with creating my own sounds, and I spent an entire summer doing that. Not just I need to know this. I fucking was obsessed with it. And through there, I learned what each part of a synth does, and it developed from there. me.
I think a big issue you can run into when you're trying to learn about creating synths or producing online is that a lot of these people came to their knowledge by just trying shit out. And they're not so quick to say something that might be wrong, but might be more helpful for you in the stage that you're in. They'd rather be correct and not say anything that's sort of like later on another producer would look at and be like, that producer doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, that's gonna happen no matter what.
Right, yeah.
In this video, probably.
I'm less afraid to be flamed in the comments if it helps you get a better understanding of it. The thing that was most helpful for me with that was looking at modular synthesis. Signal generator, ways to modify parameters of that, and then ways to modify parameters of the thing that is modifying parameters. That was easy for me to get, and I can look at it left to right and look at where the patch cables go, and I think that's a great way to learn it, but definitely this Ableton thing I'm excited about. With that said, I've been Circuit for Full Stack Creative. This has been Michael Cupp, IndiePRO Mix Concierge, all-around badass producer for Full Stack Creative, and this has been Kenny Kaminsky, another badass producer and your community support specialist. Thank you for watching this. I sincerely hope it's helpful for you if you are on a journey to get better at controlling your own sound, which I think is something that I'm on right now. It's definitely super exciting. If you liked this video, if it was helpful in any way, please like the video, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications when we drop more videos. And if you do, I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.